And can I welcome our witnesses to what is our third evidence session of our inquiry into the European Union landing obligation that comes into full effect on the 1st of January this coming year. Can I just make one or two comments? First of all, quite obviously this is a public session, it's being webcast. We're also taking a transcription which we will distribute afterwards, and if there are any faults in it or something that's inaccurate, then you're very welcome to come back to us on that and we will change it. Can I also say that obviously we have a limited amount of time, about an hour. If there's any area you think we haven't gone through sufficiently or additional evidence you'd like to give us, then please send that to our clerk, who will take that into consideration in evidence on the inquiry. Can I remind members on this first session today to declare any interests that they have, just for full transparency? I would declare that I'm a board member currently until the end of January of the Marine Management Organisation. Perhaps we could start by you just introducing yourselves, not just necessarily to us, but also to those listening on the webcast and in the public area. And Graham Doswell, perhaps I could ask you to start, and then we'll work across.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Graham Doswell. I'm an under 10-metre fisherman, third generation fisherman, and I work from Eastbourne on the south coast.
Thank you.
Hi, Jim Pettifer, Chief Executive of the Coastal Producer Organisation.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Jeremy Percy. I am Director of the new Under 10 Fishermen's Association, which is the representative body for the boats operating at boats of less than 10 metres in length in the UK fleet.
Good morning. I'm Graham Searle, skipper owner of 3 small under 10 metre boats. One primarily engaged in netting, one trawling and netting, and one angling.
Thank you very much. And although it's the other side of the coast to Plymouth, perhaps I should also declare I'm a trustee of the North Devon Biosphere Foundation as well, which has a marine aspect. Perhaps I could just ask you generally, and one of the things we'll need to try to do is to separate out the questions and not move on from one to the other, but just how significant a change in policy and practice is the landing obligation for you or for your members? Is this really a big step? Is it a cultural change? Is it turn the whole thing upside down, or is it just a breeze moving from December to January? And whoever likes to take that first. Yes, okay.
It's going to be an enormous change. Firstly, because nobody really knows anything about it, to be honest. Speaking to several fishermen within Plymouth the other day, and no one's got an idea. That's one of the primary things, considering it's coming in just a matter of weeks' time. Secondly, nobody really knows what's going to happen. I mean, at the moment, if we bring in over quota or undersized fish, it's illegal. For us to start doing that on the 1st of January and bringing it in, considering we're still being illegal, it's a complete change of policy. So it's just getting your head around that something you could do, you haven't been able to do for several years, you have to by law start doing. And again, going back to that, nobody really knows what is going on.
I agree with Graham. I've spoken to fishermen in the southeast area, Graham's from the other end of the country, and to be honest, I didn't speak to one fisherman that actually knew. Some were completely unaware of it, the landing obligation. They thought it had sort of gone to sleep and been forgotten about. Others knew that it was in the air but really didn't know what was going to happen. Some said they were just going to carry on as usual, just having to discard and just to wait and see what happens.
Okay, so Lord Rooker is going to pursue this later on in terms of the information, so I don't want to particularly pursue that at the moment. But just from what you do know, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenges or changes?
Choke species. I did quite a bit of work on the survivability of some of the discard fish that we are allowed to discard, like the plaice and skate, which are 2 of our main species, which are okay. But we've got very, very little cod quota, and although the cod seem to have disappeared from the grounds for the time being, they will come back. They always have, and the fishery can be, we just be closed and tied up, within a week or two.
As quickly as that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I totally agree with Graham there. Our netting boats, this isn't an amazingly sustainable way. We only catch fish in there, sort of 6, 7, 8 year breeding cycles. They're all large fish. We have no discards on the netting boat at all. But by other people fishing certain species, you could be engaged in the choke, and it just stops everybody. And
do you think this affects you in a different way to the over 10s and the over 12? Because you're primarily from the under 10 fleet. Do you think there's a difference there in how it's going to? I don't mean in terms of the technical regulations, but how you can deal with it, or the information that you've had.
Well, the under 10s, we're actually starved of quota. We just haven't got anywhere to go. We can't lease in, or we can lease in quota if it's available, but the people that have quota, the quota holders, know our position, and also they can almost hold the under 10s to ransom and name their price. But
so the big difference is, and it's a difference of regulation, is that the under 10s across the country, sort of 80% of the fleet, they don't hold quota. They fish against a monthly allocation which is handed out to them by the MMO, and they're on non-sector licences, which means you're not a member of a PO, all of them, even the members of the coastal PO. And if you're on a non-sector licence, you can't cross-book. So if you have 100 kilos of cod and you catch 110 kilos, if you're an over 10 in membership of one of the other POs, you can either cross-book it to another boat within the PO, or you can what's called retrospectively lease. So when you get back to port, you sell your fish through the market notifies the quota, the manager of the PO, and the PO manager moves some quota within the PO or leases some quota for another PO to cover your landings. And non-sector boats, which are all of the under 10s and a small number of over 10s, so that's the real divide. It's not over 10 and under 10s, it's non-sector versus PO members. So non-sector boats can't do that on a condition of their licences that they must have all of the quota in place that they might need before they go to sea. And so there's a very good article from the 2015 election on the BBC News website with an interview from Paul Joy from Hastings, and he talks about if I've got, I think he had 1 month 20 kilo allocation of cod, which he has at the start of the month. If the first time he goes to sea he catches 21 kilos of cod, then under the landings obligation he has to land the extra kilo. He's immediately committed an offence, and he now can't go to sea for the rest of the month in case he catches another cod. So that's how the choke thing works for the non-sector boats.
That's very useful, thank you. Jeremy, did you want to say anything particular?
Well, I don't want to add to that other than to say it is frankly a fundamental nonsense that despite the fact that the Coastal Producer Organisation, which we've collectively set up and argued the toss with, we have now been officially recognised for over a year by both Europe and the MMO and DEFRA. That gives us the ability to, as Jim has explained, to cross-book and to retrospectively lease quota to ensure that our members don't break the law, but the MMO continue to refuse us that ability. And this discrimination between the over and under 10s, frankly, is unacceptable.
Thanks very much. That's very useful. Thank you. Perhaps we could. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Does the ordinary chap in his 10-foot boat have any resistance to joining a PO?
They didn't there was a famous survey done about 3 or 4 years ago of under 10s and asked whether they wanted to join the POs, which predates the coastal PO, and 80% of them said that they hated POs and didn't want to join.
Yeah, exactly.
But then working with NUTFA, and we started working on this in 2013, I started saying to the small-scale fishermen, part of your problem is you don't have any representation. And the only formal representation is to have a PO. When the government says it consults the industry, it means it consults the POs. And because you have no boats in POs, or you don't have a PO sitting at that table because a PO is formally recognised by the government. So since then, 280 boats have joined the coastal PO, which means we've got more than twice as many under 10s as all of the UK other POs combined. We're roughly 12% of the English under 10 metre fleet, and the 12% that we have in membership are responsible for a third of all the English under 10s landings. So particularly the more active under 10 fishermen they recognised the potential benefit of being in the PO. Because they all joined, because we said to them, well, when you join the PO and the PO gets recognised, you'll be entitled to a PO licence, you'll be able to cross-book and retrospectively lease. But we were recognised in July 2017, and our members have still not been given a PO licence.
Thank you. Then Viscount Aldswater.
Cumbria, which has interests in fishing in the Solway Firth. My question is really, what's been the impact of the landing obligation on your members to date? Jim, I think, has been very explicit in how it's working, but I'm just wondering whether the rollout of this, which I understand has been over the last 4 years, has impacted on you particularly.
Well, it hasn't. Excuse me. It's had a limited impact on our members, I think mainly because nobody up to and including officialdom really understands the implications of it. Although it's been in process for 4 years and there's been bits and pieces, it hasn't really impacted on our members to any large extent. The full impact will be shown from January the 1st of 2019, where it's a big bang, really, in as much as all quota species will then be subject to the landings obligation.
So, effectively, none so far. Effectively, it's not been even noticed the 3 years where it's technically been enforced, not for all species, obviously.
I think one species is whiting, and people haven't landed it or undersized, or they just discarded it as they would and carried on so far.
Lord Krebs.
Just very briefly to follow up on an earlier comment that was made about the lack of information. I think, Graham, you mentioned a lot of fishermen don't know, and so did Graham also. I just wondered if this was true in other European member states. Do you know, do French and Spanish fishermen in small boats not know what's going on?
If I can answer that, so in my previous existence I was Executive Director of the Low Impact Fisheries of Europe, which was the equivalent small-scale representative body for European fisheries, including French and Spanish. And in a similar way, people don't have a level of understanding, and to a large extent it's been effectively just rolling on. Nobody's put over pressure in respect to the landings obligation in any sort of specific cases. The issue we're going to have is from 2019, where it all happens for everybody completely. Ostensibly, the pelagic landing obligation has been extant since 2015, but it really, with very few exceptions, hasn't impacted us. If you look more broadly into Europe, for instance in the Baltic, they've had the landings obligation in full since 2015, and I suppose, to put it politely, very largely a blind eye has been turned by officialdom in relation to the activities of fishing. There is still widespread discarding of a number of species in the Baltic by a large-scale fleet.
Okay, thank you. Lord Selkirk.
What do you expect? Well, first of all, perhaps I should say, to the best of my knowledge, I have no interest, but in the past I have fished for mackerel in the Firth of Forth in competition with the gannets. May I ask, what do you expect the impact to be when the landing obligation is fully implemented in January of next year?
I think so. It's going to be massive. It was stated by one fisherman I spoke to who said, we have two choices. We either go broke because of the choke species that Graham outlined, or we become criminals, and we're not going to go broke. I think it has been, I suppose disastrous would not be too strong a word to explain that there has been little or no preparation for it in terms of the fishermen, whether you're talking to small-scale fishermen like us or to some of the large-scale fishermen and the producer organisations. There is still almost a complete lack of understanding about what you do, what you have to do, the various rules. I emailed the Marine Management Organisation a week ago asking a number of questions which, having read through their, what they euphemistically refer to as their guidance documents that are available online, and I should say that the average age of fishermen in this country is 57, and I'm sure that a number of them are not particularly computer literate, and even me, who for my sins spends a lot of time staring at a computer screen, it's quite a trail to go through to find out what specifically refers to you, and these guys are trying to earn a living at the same time. I gave a presentation to the European Commission about 2 years ago now, where I explained the potential impact of the landings obligation on the small-scale fleet in Europe. And the head of the Commission there, in winding up, said, firstly, we had no idea that this was going to impact the small-scale fleet so much. And I think in that respect, it's worth noting that in the last 30 years, there have been 3,924 scientific papers written about the landings obligation and discard ban. 3,760 of those relate to the large-scale mobile gear, the trawler fleet, and only 164 have related to the small-scale fleet. And it's also worth recalling that 80% of the small-scale fleet use passive gears rather than mobile gears. So it's quite an imposition in that respect. So it's going to be so. The other thing the guy said was that, listen, we had two choices. We could either try and sort out all the problems and then implement the landings obligation, or implement it and then sort them out. What they conveniently ignored the fact was it's likely to either bankrupt or criminalise a number of fishermen in the process. So there hasn't been sufficient information provided in a way, in a manner that fishermen can easily understand and absorb to ensure that they will not become criminals. For instance, Graham said earlier that if you bring in over the quota at the moment, then you've effectively committed an offence. You are permitted to discard it at the moment. From January the 1st, you have to bring it in. Now, a question which might sound simple is, well, if I'm bringing in more than my quota, have I committed an offence? I spoke to the MMO on this, and they said, well, no, because we're going to have a charging regime so that fishermen will pay a charge for the over-quota fish. And I said, well, we're in December already. This comes in less than a month's time. What is that charge going to be? How is it going to be levied on fishermen? And the short answer was, we are not sure yet. We don't know. They are, at the same time, consulting on a new app for fishermen so that they can record and report their landings effectively prior to them coming to shore. But this is all we're going to consult. We haven't quite prepared ourselves. We're not quite ready. So for fishermen like this, come January the 1st, although the marine management organisations say that they have a risk-based approach to enforcement, history will show very clearly that they are more predicated on picking that low-hanging fruit, which is the small-scale fleet who come in and out on a regular basis. These guys, frankly, are easy meat for enforcement opportunities, rather than the very large-scale vessels fishing just a little bit further offshore that the MMO just doesn't check.
Any other comments? Lord Rooker, then, perhaps very relevantly.
You got me more worried than I was when I started now. I haven't got an interest to declare, but on 2 occasions I was both a MAF minister and a DEFRA minister, but I didn't deal with fishing. You know, I was farming, food safety and other issues. So, and I've never been out on a fishing boat. And I didn't bring my tape measure, but I've been looking at the length of this room. This is about the length of your boats, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm full of admiration for what you do, taking some of this size out into the oceans, I have to say. But when we started this inquiry, I had a look at the management MMO website and I printed off this landing obligation general requirements. 13th of November, it was updated just about when we started. And it gives all the material about, well, I say all the material, recording your catches, storing the catches, what you can chuck over as opposed to what you can't. And already I've picked up the vibrations that nobody's done any preparatory work with your part of the sector. So, you know, the question is literally, I think I know the answer to this, but to what extent are you clear about what the legal requirements are going to be from January? I got the impression that on some of these issues, whether it's, are they particular ones of what you can land, or is it what you have to store, how you keep undersized fish separate or not? All these issues that are listed on this advice note that's been published a bit late in the day.
Right.
Well, at best, one or two people have got a really very vague idea, and at worst, haven't got a clue. Even our fish buyer, he has 40 under 10 metre boats fish, and I spoke to him yesterday. He had spoken to the MMO, local MMO, and asked them for advice, and they said, you better look it up online. We don't know. So yeah, the knowledge of what's actually going on is very, very scarce.
I mean, to give you an idea quickly on that, Jerry was another committee yesterday where the director of operations of the MMO yesterday said part of the problem is we've got 75 enforcement officers for the MMO all the way around the English coast, and we need to double that to 150. And I'm thinking, 4th of December you're telling us this, So yeah, they don't know. So how is it possible for the fishermen to know? That's the fundamental problem.
The basics is, I think everybody will be aware by between now and the 1st of January that you have to bring in excess fish. But it's when you bring it in, what you actually do with it. Where's it going to be stored? And it says in their guidelines that all the fish has to be gutted. It has to be kept in exactly the same hygiene conditions as the fish you're landing legally onto the market, and then it can be used as crab bait or pet food or whatever. But we have to then, especially when you're on your own or there's just 2 people on the boat, like you said, smaller than this, it's all got to be prepped, it's all got to be done. You land it on the quayside and nobody knows what's happening to it. The Plymouth Trawler Agency is the 2nd biggest auctioneers in the country in Sunday South West, and we're completely and utterly unprepared for it. It belongs to me as an individual. When I put it on that market, it still belongs to me. So although I'm not going to get paid for it, and we've done all that work, how do I then actually get rid of it as crab bait or pet food or whatever? There's no clear guidance. And to do that, it's going to cost an awful lot of money. There's not enough refrigeration in Plymouth Trawler Agency at the moment, because we took that business from under £1 million a year 20 years ago to £17 million a year, and we've built and built. But we would have to double the refrigeration capacities, double the boxes, double the landing staff. Nothing's in place. There's absolutely nothing in place.
There's still no guarantee that anyone would buy it. That's the problem. I mean, one of our members from Hartlepool, because we sent out, before we were coming here, we sent out to people and said, what, have you got any comments, anything you'd like us to say? And the guy in Hartlepool came back to me and said, yeah, we've got one buyer in Hartlepool. What do I do with it if he doesn't want it? He's literally not got any idea. Sorry?
We pay for it.
Yeah, but even if he doesn't want it at all, what does this guy? He's got the fish. What does he do with it?
And I think this does illustrate the issues we've got. So that you've got 2 elements here. You've got the undersized fish, which normally you would put back, but you're now not able to do that. When you bring that in, it is your responsibility to get rid of effectively. And what is clear is that there is no. The MMO say that we're going to work in partnership with fishermen and the port authorities to make sure that this is a seamless issue. There is no issue at all here because nobody has done any preparation. As you've heard, none of the ports are ready for it. So that's the undersized fish. You can't sell it for human consumption or direct human consumption. You can go for bait, cosmetics, food additives, etc. And that is the responsibility of the fishermen. Most of the ports and certainly most of the buyers will have no interest in it at all. Then you've got the legally sized fish which you can bring in, which if you're over quota, you will now, as far as our understanding is, you will be able to sell it on the market for human consumption, but you will be charged an amount of money to ensure that you don't profit from this. So this is supposed to provide a disincentive for fishermen to catch more than their quota. Unfortunately, that's not the way that fishing works very often. You can't determine how much fish is in your net before you dump it on the deck, and you are now not going to be able to discard it. We don't know what those charges are going to be. We don't know how they're going to be levied. And we don't know also, so if for instance, the Grahams have 100 kilos of cod quota, for instance, in a month, because they have a monthly allocation, if they land 150 kilos through no fault of their own, Today, they would be prosecuted for it. January the 2nd, they will be allowed to sell it on the market. They will be charged somehow an amount for it. But what we don't understand is whether that will then come off their own individual next month's allocation of cod quota, should there be one, or whether it will come off the pool quota. And the concern we have is that the larger scale, financially well-off boats will frankly just write this into their business plan. So they'll still be able to land more fish than they have quota for, but they will be able to pay the charges for it. And this lacks that sort of disincentive, and again, discriminates between large and small vessels.
It's a more general question, really. I just want to try and get a sense of the size of the under-10s fishermen as a part of the whole fishing sector.
Well, we are approximately 80% of the fleet by number. There's about 2,380 vessels that have to fish with less than 2% of the national quota. And that is really one of our concerns, that this is rather reminds me of a sledgehammer trying to crack a nut. So, for reasons I won't go into now, despite the fact that we are 3/4 of the fleet, we have access to less than 2% of the UK quota. So that provides a problem straight away. We just don't have the flexibility. As Jim's explained earlier, we don't have the ability to retrospectively lease, to deal with other POs as we would like to, and to which we are legally allowed to do so if we were given permission for it. So we have this 2%, which we're going to struggle with. The other additional problem is that, unlike other boats, and the MMO guidance says that, if you're in an area where you're catching the wrong sort of fish or for which you have no quota, steam away to pastures new. Well, if you've got, and I've skippered boats of up to 30 metres in length, yes, you can just, okay, boys, 12 hours, steam away from those fish, try and find something else. These guys are enormously limited in their range, and they can't simply steam away to try and find an area. I'm part of the discard action group for sea fish, and we had a report 2 years ago, so we're talking about things that could have been sorted. There was a trial undertaken by 2 large Scottish pair trawlers. This is 2 boats pulling 1 net. They were given plenty of quota for a 6-month trial, as if they were running under the landings obligation. The project lasted 5 weeks before they ran out of quota. And I can remember the skipper coming to the meeting to explain that he said, we spent more time steaming around the ocean trying to avoid catching fish than we did catching fish, which is not a terribly good economic model. And he said, no matter how hard we tried, now and again, to avoid fish for which we had no quota or they were undersized. And I know this from experience, now and again, you'll bung your net up with weed or small herring or something you'll go through, and it'll close the meshes up on the trawl, and when you haul it up and dump it on the deck, that sinking feeling is horrific, because there's nothing you can do with it. You have now to bring it in. So however hard we try, the system is frankly predicated against us being able to meet the legal requirements without becoming criminals.
Okay, thank you. That's really useful. Sorry, yes, please, Mr. Pettit.
The 2,300 is the figure for England. I worked out some figures for Alex, which I've just found in my email to her. The under-10s in the UK are 4,218 out of 5,371 fishing vessels, which is, and the non-sector, which is 4,100 non-sector under-10s, including our members, and 419 non-sector over-10s. They're 4,583 of the UK's 5,300 vessels, which is 85% of the fleet. So 85% of the fleet is fishing under the conditions that licence conditions that we're talking about today.
Thank you. Can I just follow up, really, and just to ask you, I suppose, from what you've said, what you think the government, the MMO, of course, obviously not just the UK, the SFA, the other regulators should do to improve the understanding of the requirements. What should we say, because we're reporting to government, what should we say needs to be done?
I think that's one for me, actually. Slightly getting away from the landing obligation, the MMO, I regularly attend the South West Quota Advisory Group meeting, and there's usually 8 to 10 fishermen, and we've all fished 30, 40, some guys 50 years, and facing usually 3 or 4 MMO members who, some are fresh to the industry, some have got a good understanding of it. And it's our task to explain to them the intricacies of the business and what we need to do and for them to set quotas. I have to say the monthly quota system doesn't really work. You can catch a lot of fish at certain
which
times.
quota system, sorry?
The monthly quota system
monthly quota, yep.
that the MMO implements doesn't work at all. I mean, in the winter time we can catch a lot of pollock, then we never catch it the rest of the year, and that's just us. There's lots of other different scenarios for different people, but the quota system from the MMO has been mismanaged, and I have to say that it has been mismanaged. Last year there was 167 tonnes of pollock left over at the end of the year, and these South West quota meetings, they're all minuted, and we've been explaining since 2013 we need to get this caught earlier in the year, because there is none at the end of the year. It's seasonable, and they've took no notice whatsoever. By fixing fixed monthly quotas, the fish don't know the difference between the 28th of February and the 1st of March. You really don't. And after last year, we've come to a bi-monthly quota, which worked well last year, and this year now we've come to a tri-monthly quota. So the lad who's running it now, he's actually been listening and he's took it on board. And I've got to say, he's done an excellent job this last 18 months. The mismanagement before that was blatant mismanagement. And that's...
But what do you want in terms of information, in terms of the landing obligation? That's what I'm trying to get at the moment. What do you need from the regulators? What do they got to do now?
We need to try and break down some of the landing obligation into certain species. Like mixed fisheries will catch a lot of certain species, and selective fisheries won't. So there's no clear parity between the landing obligation as to which, like, netters don't catch any discards, anglers don't catch any discards, mixed fisheries do. There's no clear indication as to everybody's in the same boat, pardon the pun, as to the landing obligation.
Okay, so what information, you mentioned a number of things that you don't feel you've got, like what the charges are going to be, what the facilities are. I mean, what's a quick list of the things that you need to understand from either the government or DEFRA or the regulators or whatever?
It's like the old joke, I wouldn't start from here. It's basically, but we have to start from here. And we, the Coastal PO, have recently got an agreement from a new senior manager who's joined the Marine Management Organisation from the Food Standards Agency, that we're going to have bi-weekly meetings with him and a selection of people from the MMO, where we can actually, because it's all of the above. The fishermen around the coast, from the guy in Hartlepool, Graham in Eastbourne, Graham in Plymouth, got Chris in, on the Lizard, got a member up in Shetland. They all need different answers to a massive variety of questions for the different ways that they fish. And the only real solution is to actually use the PO model, which is what it's intended for, which is actually co-management, to sit there, the MMO rather, because you've got 75 enforcement officers around the coast, trying to implement and enforce something as complicated as this. It's not going to work, which is evident from what we've been talking about today. So actually what we need is them to sit down with us and work through the to-do list of everything that needs to be done. And that would, top of my list, of course, would be PO licences for the members in the PO.
Thank you. Graham, yes.
And a fairer share of the quotas. We just haven't got enough quotas to go around. Until that changes, nothing's going to work in that respect.
Okay.
I think also, sir, if I may say, it's time. This is becoming, frankly, nonsensical to expect this to be implemented on January the 1st. It is fundamentally obvious to even the most casual observer that fishermen generally have not been properly informed. They're still talking about consulting on a reporting app for a mobile phone, and they've sent round a video to fishermen to say they've trialled it with some selected fishermen, although we don't know who they are. But there needs to be far more time to implement this fairly, to make sure that fishermen understand. There needs to be a level of flexibility to ensure that we can be reassured that on January the 2nd there will not be some newly appointed, very enthusiastic fishery officer stood on the beach waiting for these guys to come in, supposed to be meeting legislation which they haven't been informed about. They may be by March presented with an app on a phone, and I think it's fair to just comment very briefly that one of our members in Cornwall was provided with a video explanation of the MMO app. I will have to paraphrase his language for you, sir, but he said his phone has buttons but no screen. It's easy enough to do it on land or in a large wheelhouse, but not on an open boat pitching in the open sea with the rain. The video example provided a very convenient example of being able to record 3 species from a single set of gear. That doesn't reflect his fishing ability. He fishes over 30 finfish species and 5 different sorts of shellfish using a variety of gears with a variety of soak times, all of which you're supposed to record. He says it's just not practical. So with all due respect, if these guys are presented with an app or be able to download an app on a phone they don't have to report catches come the early part of next year, this is heading for a disaster.
Okay. But that app is not to do with the landing obligation, as I understand it.
No, well, it's to do with reporting your catches, which is an inherent part of the landing's obligation. You have to record what you've caught, what you've discarded, what you're bringing in.
So part of the MMO's preparedness for the landing obligation is couched in the fact that the control regulation, which is about how you implement the Common Fisheries Policy, there's a revision of that which has been published, and all under 10 metre boats are going to have to do what's called prior notification. So they're going to have to send an electronic signal somehow from something back to shore, telling the MMO onshore what they're going to land before they come back. So the MMO's catch app, which they're now sort of touting as, oh, this is going to help with the landings obligation, it's actually with an eye to down the road. And how long did you say you think before that control regulation comes in?
Probably 2 years.
Probably 2 years. So that's they're kind of thinking down that road.
Okay, and this is for nearly the 3,000 small-scale boats that really, they don't have the ability to weigh fish aboard. And if you're outside of a certain percentage, you can be prosecuted anyway for misreporting. Whereas now the system is that you have 24 hours to provide a sales note, which means you land your fish to the market, they weigh it, and you have the exact weight. Why they need to gold plate this, frankly, is beyond us.
We need to, I think Lord Rocker wants to come back on this, but we need to make a bit of progress here.
What's the reason the MMO give for not recognising the PO?
We're officially recognised as of July. The point of the main contention is over this PO licences issue, and they say, I'm paraphrasing, but their capacity to manage the pool of quota, which is called the non-sector pool for the under 10 fishermen, if our guys were allowed to cross-book and retrospectively lease quota, then they don't think they would be able to cope with the management of that pool. And actually, because they don't have any systems, they don't have any competencies to do it. But we've got a letter from George Eustace, January 2016, where he says, really glad the coastal PO is coming along. As soon as the sector, which is us, has the infrastructure in place, my officials are very keen to work with you to have the sector managing its own quota. So we've put everything in place so that we can manage the quota exactly the same way that the other POs do. But the MMO, I think partly because in their defence, they're very, very resource short and they can't cope with change. A lot of the officials that they've got haven't been there a very long time. They struggle to retain staff. And so the idea of changing the way that they are managing 80-85% of the fishing fleet, I think is actually, they're just finding that change management really difficult. So we've kind of reached an impasse over this issue of PO licences.
Okay, but I think we need to move on because we've only got about 18 minutes left. And Baroness Wilcox.
I've got 2 technical questions here which they have written down as we do, in a sort of way, not like your boats. So first of all, I'll admit to being a Plymothian. I've been there a long time. And my grandmother, when she died, she left me 2 boats, 2 fishing boats. Some of them went to the boys, but I just got 2. And I went along to try and find these things. I'd been trained as an accountant. My parents thought that was far better for a female to do that. I found my boats. One of them already had a thing on its on its on the boat itself to say that you can't touch it because, you know, the depths are so bad I couldn't get anywhere near it. But the other one, that seemed okay. They asked me, what fish should we go for? And I said, I don't know. And they said, well, I tell you what, you make a choice and then we'll take anything else that comes in. And I thought, well, that sounded okay as well. So I chose something I liked the taste of. And the next thing I knew was everything that was coming in that looked like a lobster or that looked like something rather wonderful, they got. And I was bankrupt within 18 months. So,
Julie, I think we need to get on. You need to ask the question.
I got a reason for this. And as I sit and listen to you now, after I became successful because there was a man coming down every day in a little nice suit, and I said to him, what are you for? You're not buying anything. And he said, I work for a supermarket and we'd like to sell fish, but we don't know how to do it. I was an accountant and I did know how to do that, so eventually it all worked out very well. But listening to you now and listening to your anger about knowing what you're doing and having to work with people who don't understand what you're doing, all I'd like to say is I think there's going to be big changes made by you, and I will be delighted to watch you do it. Okay, so here are the questions which we would like answers to. To what extent do you expect quota swaps to alleviate the choke risks posed by the landing obligation? You've answered some of that already. And the second one is, to what extent are clear systems in place to allow for quota to be swapped among small-scale fishermen and between small-scale fishermen and the rest of the fleet in order to mitigate the risks of chokes?
As Baroness Wilcox said, we've covered some of this already, so brief comments would just be very useful.
You can talk about how it works at the moment.
Yeah, I'll just touch on briefly on your second question, actually. And in what Lord Rooker said about retrospective leasing and landing, at the moment I can ring up any PO, and we actually lease quite a bit of fish throughout the year. I can ring them up, I'll send them an email and say, can I have an extra 2 ton of this or 2 ton of that? And it's, yep, no problem, they've got it. That's a contract almost between me and them. I'll pay them. It's usually done the same day. If the MMO have been, so they send me an email, and the MMO's in the email, it's done the same day. But if it's on a Friday, I have to wait till the Monday. Now, for me to do that, I have to bring my fishing nets in on the Thursday. I can't fish Friday, I can't fish Saturday, I can't fish Sunday, and I can't fish Monday. Then the MMO on the Monday will say, yes, well, of course you can. You know, we know they've got the quota. Then I'll go to fish on the Tuesday. That's 4 days gone. That might be the only 4 days of good weather in that month. We all know what the winters are like in the southwest. And that's ridiculous. A legally binding contract between myself and you, or Lord Teverton, or Duke of Montrose, if I contact you and say, can I have a ton of soles, or 5 ton of pollock, or half a ton of cod, and you say, yes, you can have that, I have it, the MMO are well aware that they have it, but I still not can do that transaction until the MMO rubber stamp it, which, if it's on a Wednesday and I need it by the Friday, it's all good and well. But if it's on a Friday, excuse me, I'm in a bit of a pickle for the entire weekend, and maybe the entire month. Jim?
So that's how the current system works for non-sector fishermen under 10s and the few over 10s. And what Graham's talking about is you basically have to lease the fish that you might catch before you go to sea. So that's not retrospective leasing. Retrospective leasing is what the other POs do, where you go to sea, you catch more fish than you have quota for, you land it to the market, it goes through the market process it, notify the PO manager, the PO manager arranges to cover your overfish. Now we've set up a system, we can actually do that. The MMO can't do that. The MMO, it's not within the MMO's purpose to do it, because the MMO is not allowed to trade quota, for example. It's not allowed to do deals involving money. It can only do swaps of quota with POs. And we have a system set up where we can do it instantaneously. To answer the question about how much that's likely to help, there's a proportionality issue. So we're talking about a lot of small boats catching, in each case, a relatively small amount of fish. The under 10s They don't go very far from their home port. They're restricted to basically what's swimming past on the day that they can only catch what's there on the day that they go out. Some days there'll be too much of, pollock. And as long as we know, and the fishermen know, and if the fishermen were managing the pool of quota, the fishermen with Graham's pollock issue would say, actually, we can cover off that for you, Graham, because we know the fish is only available till when's pollock gone?
Middle of March.
Middle of March. So and the fishing year runs from January to December. So we know that the fishermen in the southwest need their pollock that early in the year, and after then it's gone. And what Graham's talking about under the current MMO management system, because the purpose that the MMO management team are given with the way that they manage the quota is, you mustn't overfish it. When it gets to the end of the year in December, you must not have overfished this, because your job will be at risk. There'll be disciplinary action or whatever. I don't know what they do. So what tends to happen is the under 10 allocation across all species is under allocated because they take such a risk averse attitude to it. Whereas the other PO managers, and I was in the room in the Southwest Quota when Andy Pillar from Interfish was talking, and he was explaining to the people from the MMO, if the fishermen were managing that pool of quota, they would make sure that by the end of the year they catch up to the limit of the quota, and then they would stop. They wouldn't sort of say, oh yeah, we can't allocate you the quota in case you catch it and then we run out. We've got to try and keep some back for the rest of the year. And what that's actually leading to is a massive underfish year on year. So they start with very little quota, like 2% of the quota across the UK, and then a massive proportion of it ends up unallocated because of the risk-averse nature of an MMO civil service person sitting there with a laptop trying to work out fishing allocations for fishermen over the year across the species around the coast. And the underfish at the moment, I think at the moment...
we're going to run out of time in a minute, and we've got sort of four more questions we need to get through. So I need to keep the answers really short if we can, otherwise, because there's some really important stuff that we need to get through as well. If you don't mind, because we've got the next session at 11:15. Mm-hmm. Just want to sort of sum up on that bit? Or
it's just we can help. If we had PO licences, we could help. Okay. But we're starting with a very small pool of quota, so we can only help to a limited extent. But we could lease extra quota.
So we're really going through a number of questions here about how it's possible or not possible to sort of make this regime work, and it's just really fairly short answers on this isn't going to work, or it is, or whatever. Graham, you want to come in? Just by all means, please, but briefly, please.
Yeah, as short as quotas have been, for instance, on cod, we were absolutely desperate for cod quota, and yet at the end of the year we've only had a 50% uptake because of the sort of careful management or over cautious management of the MMO.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Viscount Hamworth.
Yes, can the risk posed by choke species be mitigated by different techniques of landing, adopting more selective fishing gear? And what barriers are there to the adoption of more selective fishing gear? And we're presuming that the landing obligation incentivises adoption of different techniques. Can I get one more thing? Graham Searle made the distinction between passive and active gear. Could you perhaps explain that in the process of answering the other questions?
Yeah, the selective fishing by netting, I mean, at the moment, the minimum mesh size for catching pollock and such like is 90 millimetres. And we don't use 90 millimetres, we don't use 100 or 110 or 120 or 130. We use 150 millimetre nets, so we only catch fish in the 6, 7, 8 year breeding cycles at the largest possible size. All the rest, we'll catch them in the next few years. We'll go through it 1 year. There's a really contentious point at the moment. One of our colleagues in the Helfer Rivers been doing a lot of surveys on red mullet nets. Now, red mullet nets, originally you could use between 65 millimetres and 90 millimetres. They stopped you using between 70 and 90, which it's actually stopped you catching the bigger fish. Now, if we're allowed to use an 80 millimetre net, and Chris has been doing trials on that, the selectivity of fish is amazing. He's catching much larger mackerel, much larger whiting as a bycatch when you're trying to catch red mullet. The red mullet are the biggest you can possibly catch. And again, all the small ones go through. I don't know what their argument. I think their argument is that you may catch juvenile bass. You may catch the odd one or two juvenile bass, but the trials he's done, they haven't caught any yet. Now we do a bit of red mullet netting in the summertime, and we do our fishing in the middle of the channel. Where you would never catch a bass or anything. I've asked to try to use bigger size mesh. What's the point in using 65 millimetres to 69 millimetres when you can use something bigger and catch bigger fish?
I think, if I may say, the system, fishermen will, to answer your last question first, the landing obligation incentivise fishermen to fish more selectively. I think they will if the system is fair, if it's clear and it's non-discriminatory. As Graham says, the small-scale fleet, 80% of whom use passive gears, and for those it's like a net with a mesh that stays open, and that's the key. Now, we've been trawler skippers, and trawling is a very clever and technical business. I get slated for saying this, but at the end of the day, you're throwing a big mesh bag out the back and dragging it around for a bit and seeing what you catch. The problem you've got is in terms of improving the selectivity. It's very difficult for us to improve our selectivity when just merely by changing the mesh of the net, which vitally stays open under pressure, you can select fish of almost any size you like, right down to the most mature, the biggest, or anything in between. So we're already highly selective, and our argument, of course, is that we should be rewarded for that improved selectivity by better access to quota.
And that's how the CFP is supposed to work. There's lots of stuff in there that says the more sustainable you are, which the small-scale guys with their passive gear are more sustainable, the more quota you should get access to.
I suppose the question we're asking here is how in selective gear, will that immediately get us to the silver bullet on this, or is it part of the solution, or is it a big part of the solution, or is it going to take years to get, because we're already into all of that already?
We're already using selective gear because it's labour intensive to do the work we do. Every fish has got to be untangled by hand. It's not like when you empty a collar of a trawl, then you sort through the fish. With static gear, it's labour intensive. You've got to actually take each fish out. We don't want to be catching small fish or rubbish that we can't land. So the nets are devised in such a way that they target and catch the big fish.
Is it all down to mesh size, or are there other techniques?
It's also down to the way the net's hung as well, and how much slack there is in the net.
But are there any other ways of identifying the shoals, maybe by sonar or whatever?
Yes, the selectivity is not just about the gear you use, it's where you use it, when you use it, how you use it. But generally speaking, because 80% of our members use this passive gear, which is more selective, we will struggle to be more selective in terms of the size of fish, but we can't very often avoid catching fish. It is, after all, the raison d'etre of most fishermen to go to sea and catch fish. So we are hamstrung because we can't move away from fish. We are limited in the area that we can operate. We do operate far more selectively than some other gears, so we would struggle to improve our selectivity in terms of size, but not in terms of number.
Okay, briefly, yes.
Bycatch, discarding, if you like, on undersized fish is just about 0.1% or less. Absolutely zero. We've had CFAS scientists come with us, and they do sort of catch composition. They see what we're catching, and we don't get any discards to talk of undersized. Ours is all in a static gears quota discards.
Yeah, I think the fundamental point is the overfishing problem is an industrial fishing problem. It's not a small-scale, local, artisanal, however you want to describe it.
Fishing problem. Duke Montrose, you wanted to ask a very brief supplementary.
I'm a member of the Freshwater Fisheries Trust, but how many sizes of net can the average 10-metre boat afford to keep?
Go on, Graham.
We use several different types, ranging from small mullet nets to our pollock and cod nets, which are 150 millimetres 6 inch, up to turbot nets, which are 300 millimetres. One of our big problems is if I wanted to change to a different type of net, I would go to my net manufacturer and say I want something a bit different, like a 155 millimetres or whatever. It would take me 3 or 4 months before that net actually arrived from Malaysia or wherever it comes from, and then another few months to rig it. When I wanted to use that net on a certain species, I may have no quota left then, also the people that it's all about fishermen, but the people that buy the nets, the net manufacturers, they spend tens and tens of thousands buying certain size nets for us, and then there's a change in policy, and then we'll all turn around to him and go, actually, I don't want that net anymore, and he's ordered a container full of them.
Okay, thank you. So then, Lord Krebs.
Thank you, Lord Chairman. Just an interest, I am an advisor to two food retailers, Marks and Spencer's and Tesco. I wanted to ask about compliance, and particularly what experience, if any, you have of how the landing obligation is being enforced and might be enforced in the future.
I've seen no enforcement at all as yet at sea.
Anything else? Graham?
No, it's been something of a void to date. And our concern, of course, is that come January, bang.
And is that mainly because it's sort of pelagic fish that are involved at the moment that you're not particularly in those fisheries, or is it because just nothing has happened at all anyway?
I think it's probably mostly the former, plus it's been quite bitty, so that it's been, I don't think anybody's understood it really very clearly.
Thank you. Okay, Lord Cameron.
Yes, I think you answered my question actually, which was about whether the landing obligation is going to lead to more illegal discarding. I mean, which you say, you think it almost certainly is. I don't know whether you want to add anything more.
Well, I think the problem is going to be so because of everything we've said. You understand that there is immense confusion. Nobody's quite sure, and fishermen are going to put fish on the deck and think, can I bring this in? It's undersized, it's within size. Am I going to be charged what the system is? I've got this app which I don't understand because it doesn't fit on my phone. And at the moment, and let me stress that no fisherman likes to stand on the deck of a boat at 3 o'clock in the morning and throw back good fish. So it's not just a consumer or public concern about discarding. None of us like to do that. But they are going to be in a situation where, as I said right at the outset, they're either going to be criminalised or they're going to go bankrupt. And to be honest, and I can't speak for fishermen, I wouldn't dare say so, but if I was stood on the deck of my boat and I'm thinking, this is a bit risky, I would be tempted to throw it back.
Thank you. And Baroness Shin.
Thank you. So just leaving aside the issues that might arise with compliance, could I ask you, what do you think needs to be done to ensure compliance with the landing obligation?
I think, to be honest, and others people have views, is that it needs to be, as I said previously, there needs to be a much more careful implementation of it. It needs to be very, very light touch in terms of enforcement, because it's clear, I think, from what the evidence we've given, is that fishermen don't understand the requirements either at sea, landing, or ashore. So I think the idea that we're going to have some sort of big bang introduction with perhaps some over enthusiastic enforcement is a very serious concern. I think what should happen is that we carry on, people start slowly to meet the requirements, there is a discussion, a conversation, a fairly clear one between enforcement and fishermen, so that as fishermen, that's not right, that it's a more gradual recognition of the requirements. There are some issues that I think are going to be almost insurmountable, where you have, for instance, in the southwest of England for next year, the scientific advice is for a zero catch on cod. So effectively, you can catch no cod. So if you ask fishermen what are the implications of this, they will say, we don't know. There is going to be a union bycatch allowance, which is beyond my comprehension in many respects, because we're going to share some sort of bycatch, fudge to be honest, allowance between us and other European vessels fishing on the same grounds, and trust each other not to overfish. So it has to be far more sensitively and carefully implemented by both parties.
Quick follow-up on that. Do you think REM, remote electronic monitoring, will help with compliance?
Well, REM, we're talking about nearly 3,000 small boats that fish on some element of quota species. It's how far you go with remote electronic monitoring. So, for instance, even the largest of the UK's pelagic vessels do not have cameras aboard, for instance. Graham here fishes out of Eastbourne an under 10 metre boat. He is faced with some of the largest trawlers in the world fishing just outside him in the channel, which of course is a very narrow piece of water. These vessels, his boat is 32 feet long, these boats are up to 470 feet long, and they're fishing without any cameras, etc. aboard. And it really is something of a fundamental nonsense, where if you're going to have REM implemented, then it has to be done sensitively and to avoid gold plating enforcement. We are going to have inshore vessel monitoring, so they know where we are and to an extent what we're doing. I think that's probably sufficient, and tied in with the reporting systems will at least provide government and others with more information about our effort. And one of our failings as an under 10 metre fleet is we've never been asked to report and record where we go, what's important to us, and so on and so forth. And if they haven't got the data, then it's very difficult to treat us fairly.
Okay, I have a couple of supplements we need to be, because we're pretty well up on time. Lord Krebs.
Very briefly, we've heard a lot of worries or criticisms from you about the implementation of the landing obligation from the 1st of January. But I just wanted to step back and ask, do you agree that some form of landing obligation, discard ban, is important as a part of the process of making fishing more sustainable? So do you accept the principle of it, but have criticisms about the practicality, or do you reject the principle?
In a word, from my perspective, yes, we recognise that we should be encouraged and supported to reduce our discard rate as much as humanly possible for the reasons I have given earlier. Yeah. In some areas it is very difficult to do so, and if it leads to overt enforcement action, then it's grossly unfair, especially to our guides.
I think if the sort of low impact fishes, the ones that don't have a discard problem, size wise, should be rewarded with more quota.
Yeah. All fishermen, no matter what their job is, whether it's netting or angling or pelagic trawling or demersal trawling, we all fish to the best of our capabilities. We obviously want to catch as much fish as possible, but we also want to have that fish available again next year and the year after and the year after, the year after. It's often sometimes put across like we're just out there to pillage the seas. We're not. We're in the absolute best position to know what's on the ground, to see what's available, and fish in a sustainable manner. At the moment in the southwest, we're dumping tons and tons of perfect size, large bass that are caught in the demersal trawl. They haven't targeted this species, but they're allowed to land 1% of their daily catch. There's small boats there that are struggling, really financially struggling, dumping £10,000 of a fish in one day. Now that they only want to earn £4,000 or £5,000 a week, but they've been forced to dump this. For years now, we've stopped targeting of bass by large pelagic pair trawlers. We've stopped drift netting for bass in the Eastern Channel. These were targeted measures of bass fishing, and since that's happened, there's a huge upturn in the bass stocks. And for years and years before, we was allowed to catch it and benefit from that. Now it's just getting dumped. It's all over social media, of 10 metre boats catching 2 ton of bass in one short tow.
Yeah, if I say very briefly, just to add to what I just said, really, that if you look at the reasons for discarding, they're mainly you don't have the quota, you're catching undersized fish, or they're of no economic value. In relation to the small-scale fleet, certainly, it is quota, the lack of quota. So you catch biologically sustainable landings of fish that you are not allowed to land. You have to discard. It is not the fault of fishermen that we're in the position we are. We're in the position we are because the system pushes into it. As you've heard, for vessels using passive gear, we don't have the size issues in terms of discards. It's purely the quota system.
Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, I have it needs to be very short to Lord Selkirk.
I noticed a huge fish in his photograph. Is there procedures for dealing with huge fish, which are totally unexpected, dealt with differently or the same as everything else?
It's what we target. We just target. In the winter time, we tend to target just mainly pollock, and then we'll get like a few massive cod in the nets, and then a few ling. There's nothing else. We just target those 3 species. And by our selective way of fishing and the areas we put our nets, we can pretty much guarantee exactly what we're going to catch. Not quantities, but of selection of individual species.
Okay, I need to bring it to an end there. Gentlemen, can I Thank you very much indeed for having gone through with us. It's been a most useful session, and very particularly useful for us to hear it from the front line, as it were. Thank you very much indeed. And you're very welcome to remain for the second session if you wish. So I bring that session to an end, and if I could ask.
The proceeding is currently suspended.